Welcome to the Brass and Woodwind Shop. This is the second video in the Restoring a Bass Trombone series. After the last video, there was a lot of discussion about the tubing in the bell section of this trombone and about what the dependent system is. The independent system has two valves right in a row, and the sound goes through both valves at all times. In the dependent system, if you push down both valves, then the sound will go through the F tubing, and then it will come to this one and it will get added on and then go through the rest of the instrument. If only this valve is pressed down, then the sound never makes it to this point, so it really does not change anything. It only changes something if the F valve is pressed down first. Also, I mentioned that this trombone was in the key of B flat, F, or G, but that was a mistake. If no valves are pushed down, it's in the key of B flat, but if the F attachment valve is pushed down, then obviously it's in the key of F. But then when you get to this tubing, it adds extra tubing onto it, and that lowers the pitch. So I should have said that it's in the key of B flat, F, or E. I was also wondering if this would be E or E flat, because it looks like there's too much tubing for it to lower it a half step, but it looks like not quite enough to lower it a whole step. I have a baritone over here to show you what I'm talking about. If you unwrapped the tubing on a baritone and a trombone, not the valve section but everything else, it would be the same length. Now the bore size and the bell size and everything like that is going to be very different, but the length of the tubing is going to be the same on both instruments. When you push down the second valve on a baritone, you add on this length right here, which adds a half a step to it. When you push down the first valve, you add this much tubing and it adds a whole step onto the instrument. So I was wondering, is this a whole step or a half step? Now, if you look at the tubing section on this baritone and then look at the tubing on this trombone, it's a lot longer than the second valve slide on the baritone. But then you look at the first valve tubing on the baritone and it's a lot longer than this tubing. I measured the length of the tubing on these three valves. This one adds approximately 12 inches to the length of the tubing. On the second valve on the baritone, which raises it a half step, it adds about 7 inches. And on the first valve, which raises it a whole step, adds approximately 14 inches. This one is 12 inches, which is in the middle of those two, so it made me wonder what's going on, but then I figured out what it was. The longer the tubing gets on an instrument, the more tubing you need to add to lower the pitch. So if you're playing a trombone in the key of B flat, and you wanted to lower it a half a step, you would pull it out about that far, and forgive me trombone players if it's not exact, I'm not a trombone player. But then, if you push down the F attachment, you would need to pull the slide out a little bit farther to keep it in tune. On a tenor trombone like this one, usually you would use the F attachment to lower it 6 positions, so instead of playing 6th position like this, you can play it like that. However, on a bass trombone, usually you would use the F attachment to get the low notes. And if you want to lower the note farther, your slide is probably already out pretty far, and then you're using the F attachment to lower it more. So if you want to lower a trombone a half a step, you have to add a lot more tubing than you would if the slide is in all the way. So therefore, you would add approximately 12 inches to the length of the tubing instead of only 7 like you would on a baritone. So on the bass trombone, if you're in 7th position and both valves are pushed down, then you will be able to play the low B. After that rather lengthy explanation, I'm going to start working on the bell section. The first thing I'm going to do is clean it up. I'm ready to chem clean the bell section. For the small parts, I have a bucket. It has a whole bunch of holes in the bottom, and I put the small parts in there. And I also make sure that the tubes of the tuning slides are pointed up. That way the liquid can get into them. On the bell section, I'm going to put it in with the bell pointing up, and that's so that the chemicals can get into most of the tubing at least. One section that will not be able to get chemicals to it is right here, and that's because there's going to be a bubble trapped in there. So what I'm going to do is take a hose and put it in there, and then have the other end of the hose pointed above the chemicals, and that will let the chemicals in. And then once they're in, I can remove the hose. There's a bucket of little parts, and all the chemicals got into there. And now the bell section. I'm going to put the hose in and put that in there like that. Okay, now that the chemicals are in, I can pull out the hose. And then I'm going to move it back and forth to get out the bubbles in the other sections. Okay, there, I think that's good. Now I'm going to leave it there for about 5 minutes. It's not that dirty, so it should not take too long to get cleaned up. It has been 5 minutes, and I'm taking these out. I need to turn these upside down to let the chemicals out. And then the bell section. I have to turn this around to let out all the chemicals. Now I'm going to wash all the chemicals off because the chemicals will keep acting as long as you're on the instrument. Chemicals can harm lacquer if it's on there for too long. And this lacquer is already a little bit thin. And I'm not going to re-lacquer this instrument, so I want to be careful with the lacquer. Now I'm going to put the snake through the tubing to clean it out. And like I said before, this is not very dirty, but I still want it cleaned up because, well, for starters, I want it clean. Also, if there's any junk left in here, when I put the dent balls through, it could push up on the metal. Then it leaves bumps on the metal, and I don't want that, so I just want to make sure that this is clean before I do the dent work on it. The bell section looks like it is not in that bad of condition, but there are a lot of little things that need to be done to it. Now I'm going to remove dents. Usually I start with one end of the instrument and then I just work my way through to the other end of the instrument. So I'm going to start with the bell, and if you've watched my videos very much, you know that I use this dent roller a lot for the dents in the bell flare of an instrument. I have two sizes. The small one is usually used on trumpets, and the large one is usually used on low brass. This is a large bell, so I'm going to use the large dent roller. This works very well for removing dents and bell flares. A lot of times this is the only tool I use to remove dents and bell flares. Sometimes I need other tools, but on this one I think I can probably do it with just the dent roller. I will leave a link in the description below to where you can get one of these. The dent roller works very well for dents from the bell rim up to about right there. There are several dents throughout here. And I'm just going to go one at a time and pull those dents out. When I get to the larger dent, there's a different way to do that. You do not want to do that dent all at once. You do it like part of the way, and once you get the dent out a little bit of the way, then you turn it around and go at it from the other side. How hard you push depends on several things, like the hardness of the metal, the thickness of the metal, the type of dent that it is, how bad the crease is, if it's really creased or if it's more of a smooth type of dent. And also the size of the bell makes a difference too. So I'm just getting that dent part of the way out. If you tried to plow through and push the dent out all at once, it would make a mess by the time you're done. Because of the way that the metal stretches, you need to take it out a little bit at a time. This crease right here, the metal is coming up, and the other crease right here, the metal is going in. So I have to get it from one side for here, and then from the other side for here. I know it may seem kind of complicated, but once you do a dent, it's not really that hard to do. You just need to pay close attention to what you're doing. And this is something that you need to concentrate on. You cannot just roll this over the bell and say, okay, I'm done. You need to know where the dent is and how hard to push. And how hard you push changes throughout the dent. I mean, you have the same dent. Like, I'm doing a dent here. I'm pushing a little bit. Then when I get to right under the dent, I'm pushing harder. And then I'm lightening up. So you have to, at all times, control how hard you're pushing down on the dent. And then also after I'm done getting the dents out like this, the dent is not all the way done. I'm going to come at it from the other side also for all of these dents. And I will probably end up going around the bell probably 4 or 5 times before I am done. So I'm just going to continue working on those dents until they are out. Now I'm going around my second time and pushing the dents out a little more. Another technique you can use is where you push the dents down. You see me working with my hands about this far apart most of the time. Other times I have to go together closer or farther apart. And also sometimes I might need to pull down right over on the bell rim. I would do that on a dent that's really close to the edge of the bell. But you just do whatever you need to do to get the dents out. And again, this may seem complicated, but once you've had a little practice, it does get a lot easier. If any of you do want to do dent removal, I suggest going to a music store and finding a junk instrument. Usually music stores sell them very cheap, and working on that and just practicing at it. And once you get good at it, then move on to other instruments. I'm going to turn the camera off and finish these dents. I'm done getting the dents out of the bell flare. You can see some rippling there. It's not perfect. Also, you can see that the throat of the bell is not quite round, and I have not done that yet. I'm going to do that shortly. After you get dents out of the bell flare, the ones that are shaped like this, or even worse, the ones that are kind of curl up the bell, you need to check the bell for flatness to see if it is flat. So I'm going to do that on my showcase. A piece of glass works well for that. You set it down, and then you see which way it wobbles. This actually is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I can tell it's going back and forth, right? Let's see. I think it's teetering about this point. So I know that these are the low points, and the rest of this here is a high point. So I'm going to take the bell at the low points right here, and then take my thumbs and push down on that. And you have to be careful not to go too far when you do this. And then I'm going to set it down. Okay, I don't know if I did much to it. I'm going to have to push a little harder, I think. Okay. And I am using the flexing motion. You should always use a flexing motion when you work on instruments. If you push with a constant pressure and push too hard, you're just going to go until you bend the bell. But if you use the flexing motion, that's where you go back and forth. You can control your force more, and you can also feel what the metal is doing, and then you can stop before something bad happens. I'm going to set this down again. Like I said, this is not that bad, but I would like it better than this. I'm also going to hold the bell up and look at it this way too, and see where the high spots and low spots are. And that will help me too. Okay, I see a low spot here, so I'm going to do that. Let's see, there's a high spot, so I'm going to turn it around and push on that. Okay, this is a little bit closer now, but it's still not quite right. I'm just going to work on this until I get it right. It's about a minute later, and the bell sits flat on a flat surface, so that is good. I'm done getting the dents out of the flare of the bell. Now I'm going to work on the throat. And the throat goes from about here to about here. This is one of my tapered mandrels, and it's called the trombone throat mandrel. And there is a smaller one, it's called a trumpet throat mandrel. And the end of it, it's only slightly curved. The edge is fairly sharp. So if you have a sharp dent, you usually use the end to get that out. And if there's a dent that's more smooth, usually you push the dent out with the side of the mandrel. Since the mandrel is tapered, it has different diameters, so use the diameter that you need. A little while ago I mentioned that the throat was not perfectly round, and you can feel that if you turn it around in your hand, you can feel the high spots and the low spots, and you can also see them. And you can use this mandrel too to push those out. What you do is find the low spot and then use the large part of the mandrel and push on the bell and try to push that low spot up. Sometimes you can also use your hands to round this out. You find where the high spot is, and then you put your palm over the high spot, and then you find the other high spot and put your fingers over that, and then you put your palm over your fingers and you push on the bell. And again, you use the flexing motion. That way can work too. You use whatever way you need to use to get the dents out that you need to get out. I'm going to work on the several dents that are here, and I'm mostly going to use the side of the mandrel. And I'm getting that dent out right there, and then I'm going to move on to the next dent. If there was a sharp dent, I would use the corner of the mandrel, but since they're mostly not, I'm going to use the side. So I'm going to keep going around the throat and get the dents out. And this should not take too long. There are a few dents that I need to push out with the edge of the mandrel. They're not sharp dents like you usually push out with the edge, but they're dents that are not coming out with the side. So I'm going to use the edge of the mandrel, but I need to find where the mandrel is. You push down on the instrument and then move it back and forth. You can see the little ripple in the bell, and it does not leave any marks if you do not push very hard. But that's how you can see where the mandrel is underneath the metal. Here's a flat spot in the throat, and that's what I was talking about when I said that the throat is not round. So what I'm going to do is push down on the high spots, and then I'm going to push on the bell kind of hard in the middle there, and try to get that flat spot to come up. At least come up where the low spot is and go down where the high spots are. Let's see. And are there any more flat spots? Here's a flat spot right here. So I'm going to do the same thing there. Okay. Here's another low spot right here. So I'm going to do the same thing. It's very important when you're using tapered mandrels to make sure that the mandrel is right underneath where the dent is, that you're not off to one side or the other, because if you do that you can cause damage or push the metal too far in the wrong direction. Sometimes you're pushing on a dent and wondering why it's not coming out, and then you realize, well, the mandrel is in the wrong spot and I just pushed a dent in from the other direction, and then you have another dent you need to deal with. I'm done with the throat mandrel, and here's what the bell looks like. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And I could smooth it out a little bit by burnishing it, but I'm not going to do that because burnishing can harm the lacquer, and the lacquer is already not the best. And it can cause other problems. It can harden the metal. So if you can do it without burnishing, that's better. So I'm sacrificing a little bit of rippling on here so that I don't do other potential damage. I've removed the dents about up till here, and now I'm going to move up to the next mandrel, which will get some of these out. But I am out of time now, so I will save that for the next video. Please subscribe for more band instrument repair videos, and look in the description below for links to related videos.